The day after my wife's funeral, my son shoved papers across the table, demanding I sign away my $900,000 house. My daughter-in-law leaned back in my wife's armchair like she already owned it, calling me an old fool. They thought grief made me weak. But tucked in a wooden box was my wife's last letter, and what she wrote will burn their greedy world to ashes. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from in the comments. I sat in my living room, the house too quiet after the storm of betrayal. My son's words still echoed in my ears, cold and sharp. Dad, the house isn't yours anymore. Sign the papers. That house, worth nearly $900,000, wasn't just lumber and stone. It was my wife's roses blooming in the front yard. It was the scar on the wooden floor where my son once dropped his toy truck. It was every laugh and every prayer whispered under this roof. To hear him call it his, to see my daughter-in-law sink into Margaret's armchair with that smirk on her face, was like a knife twisting in my chest. I had given them everything, and now they wanted to take the very ground under my feet. I remembered the years I spent working double shifts at the firehouse. I pulled extra nights, risked my life in burning buildings, and when the overtime pay came, it didn't go toward vacations or new suits for me. It went straight into his future. I paid $60,000 for his college tuition so he could walk into a world I had never known. When he wanted a car, I scraped together $25,000 more for a second-hand sedan so he wouldn't have to ride the bus to his job. I even refinanced this very house once to cover his wedding expenses when he insisted on having a ceremony grand enough to impress his wife's family. I told myself it was worth it because he was my boy, because family deserved sacrifice. I gave not just my money, but my bones, my time, my whole back bent under the weight of making sure he had more than I ever did. But it wasn't just dollars that I gave up. No, the real sacrifices can't be measured on a ledger. I remembered nights when my buddies planned trips, fishing in Montana or golfing in Arizona, and I stayed behind because we couldn't afford it. I remembered Margaret's dream of traveling to Italy, a dream we postponed year after year because tuition bills came first. I remembered evenings when dinner was beans and rice, when Margaret clipped coupons until her fingers ached, just so our son could have brand-name sneakers and not be teased in school. The sacrifices were carved into my very soul. We lived with less, believing it would buy him more. And standing here now, staring at the papers he shoved across the table, I realized all that sacrifice had bought nothing but entitlement and greed. The house around me told its own story, one he would never understand. $900,000, yes, that was its market value, but its true worth couldn't be counted. Margaret planted every rosebush with her own hands, bending down with the sun in her hair. The dining table still bore faint scratches from the nights our son did his homework while I checked the bills. The walls in the hallway were lined with photographs our wedding day, his graduation, the Thanksgiving dinners where laughter filled every corner. Now, when I looked at those frames, the warmth was gone. They had become reminders of how quickly blood can turn cold. The couch where my son once curled beside me to watch football now felt like a stranger's seat. The kitchen where Margaret baked apple pies smelled of betrayal instead of cinnamon. The past and present collided in this house, every memory now poisoned by the thought that he wanted to strip it away from me. One evening, I wandered into Margaret's closet, searching for comfort in her familiar scent still clinging to the fabric. I opened an old cedar chest, its hinges creaking like a sigh. Inside were folded quilts, letters, and at the very bottom, a small wooden box I had never noticed before. My hands trembled as I lifted it, the grain smooth, the lock delicate. The key was taped underneath. I sat down, heart pounding, and opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope with my name written in her handwriting. I traced the letters, tears burning my eyes. Slowly, I unfolded it. Margaret's words spilled onto the page, shaky but strong. If you are reading this, Henry, it means you're fighting a battle I feared might come. Our son will only inherit if he treats you with respect and care. If he forgets that, this letter is your shield. Stand tall. Beneath it was a will, signed and notarized, unknown to anyone else. Every asset, every account, every corner of this house was mine, until the day I left this earth. My son had no claim, not unless he honored me. Margaret had seen it coming. She had prepared this not out of bitterness, but out of love, knowing the man our son had become. I closed the box with shaking hands. Betrayal from my son was sharp enough. But betrayal mingled with the truth that Margaret knew and carried silently was a wound that nearly split me in two. She had borne that burden alone, protecting me even in death. The pain was doubled, but so was the fire it lit inside me. I sat there, clutching that letter, and something inside me shifted. The grief that had weighed me down turned into something else, resolve. For the first time in weeks, my hand steadied. I whispered into the quiet, "Margaret, I hear you. I won't let them erase us. Not our house, not our love, not the life we built." The letter wasn't just paper. It was a weapon, a shield and a sword all in one. It carried her voice, her foresight, her belief in me. I could almost feel her presence beside me, urging me forward. This wasn't just about property anymore. It was about respect. It was about protecting her legacy and mine. I thought about the neighbors who had stood by me, like Mrs. Collins, who always checked in to see if I needed groceries. I thought about the young man down the street, Jason, who helped mow my lawn without asking for a dime. Strangers had shown me more kindness than my own son, and in that contrast I saw clearly who deserved to carry forward what I had built and who did not. As I read Margaret's words again, the anger in my chest turned into clarity. The betrayal still burned, but I saw now that I wasn't powerless. I had been blind, yes, too quick to believe that money and sacrifice would guarantee loyalty. I had mistaken providing for parenting. Love without boundaries, I realized, isn't love. It's a leash for those who only want to pull tighter. I sat back, shaking my head at myself. Maybe I was too blind. Maybe I thought money could buy respect. The words slipped out, half to Margaret, half to the empty room. But the realization steadied me. My mistake wasn't loving too much. It was loving without lines, thinking that everything had to be given instead of taught. That mistake ended tonight. I reached for my phone, saw a message from my son. "Dad, let's talk. Don't make this worse." My thumb hovered, then I pressed delete. No reply. For the first time, silence felt like freedom. I shut the phone off, leaned back in Margaret's chair, and let the stillness wash over me. That small act felt like a wall being built, a barrier that said, "No more." It wasn't revenge. It was survival. It was the first step in taking my life back. The house around me shifted as my mind did. The living room, once warm, now felt like a battlefield. Margaret's photo on the wall seemed to watch me, her smile both comforting and command. The grandfather clock ticked louder than usual, not soothing but insistent, like it was counting down to the moment I would have to stand tall. The armchair where Margaret once sat no longer felt like just furniture. It felt like a throne of memory, urging me not to give in. The silence of the house was no longer emptiness. It was preparation. It was the deep breath before the fight. I ran my fingers along the edges of the letter again, whispering, "I won't let them win. I promise you." The promise wasn't just to Margaret, it was to myself, to the man I had been, to the father who once believed his son would always stand by him. The pain was heavy, yes, but within that pain was the spark of something new. It was resolved, and it was growing. That night I stayed in the living room until the early hours, the wooden box on the table, the letter beside me, the tick of the clock keeping me company. I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel weak anymore either. I felt like a man who had walked through fire and found, somehow, that the flames hadn't burned him out. They had tempered him. By the time the sun rose, I knew this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of theirs. They thought betrayal would break me. They were wrong. It had built me stronger, and soon they would see just how much fire an old man could still carry. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment one below to let me know you're here with me. The morning after I found Margaret's letter, I woke up different. The grief still weighed heavily on my chest, but it wasn't a chain anymore. It was armor. For weeks I had been paralyzed, stumbling from room to room, letting my son and his wife treat me like a helpless old man. But not today. Today, my hands didn't shake when I poured my coffee. My voice didn't tremble when I said my morning prayer. Today, I was ready to act. The first call I made was to Rebecca, my attorney of 30 years. Her voice came through the line, calm, professional, but also familiar, like the voice of someone who had seen me through storms before. I told her everything, my son's demand for the house, the papers shoved across the table, the smug way Amanda sat in Margaret's chair, as if she had already claimed it. Rebecca listened, then said firmly, "Henry, we'll freeze every account and secure the deed to your house today. No one can move a penny without your signature. I'll prepare documents for you to sign." My heart steadied at her words. When she emailed the forms, I printed them right there in my kitchen, and for the first time since all this began, I held a pen without trembling. I signed. My signature, bold and clear, spread across the page. The ink wasn't just ink, it was a declaration. I am not done. Later that day, I walked into the bank, the same one where I had deposited every paycheck, where Margaret and I had opened our first savings account decades ago. The young teller smiled politely, but when I explained why I was there, her eyes softened with concern. She brought over Mr. Harris, the branch manager who had known me for years. He listened quietly, then said, "Mr. Walker, don't you worry. We'll lock down those accounts. They can't touch a cent." He paused, then leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Are you all right, sir? This must be hard." That simple question asked by a man who wasn't my blood, who owed me nothing, struck deeper than anything my son had said in months. My own flesh had tried to strip me bare, but here was a stranger offering care. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. "I'll be all right, thanks to people like you." By evening, the accounts were frozen, $300,000 secured. The deed to my house was reaffirmed in my name. On paper, I was safe. But in my heart, the battle was just beginning. It didn't take long for David and Amanda to show up again. They came to the house 2 days later, carrying folders, spreadsheets, and legal pads like they were executives about to close a deal. Amanda strutted in first, her heels clicking against the hardwood, and Sarah followed right behind, carrying a slim folder clutched like it was dynamite. David, my son, wore that smug half-smile that used to remind me of a boy proud of a prank, but now it looked more like the grin of a man who thought he had already won. "Dad," David began, spreading papers across my dining table as though it were his office desk. "We've drafted a plan. You'll sign here and here, and the house will be transferred. You'll be taken care of in a nursing facility, private room, good doctors. We've even worked out the monthly costs. It's better this way." "Of," Amanda cut in, her voice sharp. "It's not just better, Henry. It's necessary. You can't manage this place anymore. It's worth $900,000, and it's rotting with you in it. Don't you want peace of mind?" She slid a glossy brochure of a nursing home toward me, smiling like she was offering a gift. I sat back in silence, watching them. My silence wasn't a weakness this time. It was a strategy. Let them talk. Let them reveal everything. David tapped the paper impatiently. "Dad, this is practical. You'll be safer, and we can manage things." He was already speaking as if it were decided. That's when Sarah, my daughter, stepped forward. She had been quiet until now. With a quick glance at her brother, she pulled out her folder and opened it. "We didn't want to do this, Dad," she said, her tone rehearsed, almost pitying. "But we have to show you, for your own good." She pressed play on her phone. It was a recording of me, my voice, fumbling over dates, confusing years, mumbling about Margaret's hospital appointments. The clip was from a family dinner, I realized instantly, the one I had thought was warm, normal, a rare evening of togetherness after Margaret's passing. But they had been recording me. They had baited me with questions, setting traps in casual conversation, just so they could capture me stumbling over a detail. "See?" Sarah said, her eyes cold, her lips trembling with fake sympathy. "You can't even remember what year Mom died. You're losing track, Dad. It's not safe for you to be in charge anymore." The sound of my own faltering voice filled the room, bouncing off the walls of the house Margaret built with her love. My chest burned. Betrayal by David was one thing. But Sarah, my little girl, the one whose prom dress I stayed up late hemming with Margaret, the one I walked down the aisle with tears in my eyes. She had turned family dinner into an ambush. My hands clenched the armrests of my chair. Rage boiled inside me. They had twisted my grief into evidence. They had dressed up their greed as concern. I wanted to shout. I wanted to tear the phone from her hand. But I didn't. Instead, I stared at them, my silence heavier than any words. Let them think they had crushed me. Let them think their little performance had worked. Inside, though, I was on fire. That night, after they left, I sat again with Margaret's wooden box. My tears had dried, replaced by a sharp determination. I opened the envelope again, reading her words until they etched themselves into my bones. And as I shuffled through the stack of papers she had left, I found something new. At the bottom was another document, one I had overlooked in my grief. It was a deed. A deed to the very apartment David and Amanda were living in now. I blinked, stunned. The lease they had shown me months ago, the story of scraping to afford rent it, had all been a lie. Margaret had bought that apartment years ago as an investment, in my name. Legally, it belonged to me. They weren't tenants of some faceless landlord, they were tenants of mine. The irony hit me so hard I laughed, bitter and sharp. They had tried to strip me of my home while living comfortably in a property I owned. Margaret had seen further ahead than I ever imagined. Her foresight was now my sword. I held the deed up, whispering into the silence, "They think I'm beaten. They think this is over. But this is just the beginning." My reflection stared back at me from the glass of Margaret's photo frame. My eyes didn't look like a broken old man anymore. They looked alive, sharp, burning with purpose. The next morning, Rebecca called back. She had news of her own. "Henry, I did some digging. David has debts, serious ones. Credit cards maxed out, late payments stacking up. And Amanda, her employment history isn't clean. I found lawsuits. One from her old firm over misappropriated funds." I gripped the phone tighter. The pieces were falling into place. Their desperation wasn't just greed. It was survival. They weren't pushing me into a nursing home because they cared. They were drowning, and they wanted to drag me under with them. "Hold on to everything," I told Rebecca. "Every scrap of paper, every record, we'll need it soon." My voice was steady, no quiver, no hesitation. I was no longer the man who had trembled at the sight of my son's signature line. I was a man preparing for battle. That evening, I sat in the living room again, the documents spread across the table. The house deed, the frozen accounts, the apartment deed, Margaret's letter, Rebecca's files, my arsenal. Each paper felt like a brick in the wall I was building between me and their betrayal. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of the next confrontation. I welcomed it. I thought about that recording Sarah played, her cold voice accusing me of being confused. I replayed it in my mind, but this time, I didn't hear weakness. I heard grief. I heard a man who had just lost his wife struggling to remember details through tears. That wasn't confusion, that was mourning, and they had twisted it into a weapon. I clenched my fist, whispering into the quiet. They'll regret turning my pain into their proof. They'll regret every word. Before I went to bed, I picked up my phone again. The message log was full of their attempts to reach me. Calls, texts, all filled with fake concern. I deleted everyone. For the first time in years, I felt no need to respond. Their words no longer had power over me. I turned off the lights, but before I climbed the stairs, I looked once more at Margaret's picture on the wall. "They think I've lost," I said softly. "But the game has just begun." And I meant it. If you've ever seen a father treated like a burden, if you've ever felt the sting of being dismissed as useless, then you understand. This isn't just my fight. It's a fight for respect. So tell me, right now, type the word respect in the comments, because that's what every parent deserves. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment too below to let me know you're here with me. The afternoon light sat heavy over my living room, the sort of gold that makes dust look like slow snow. I had opened the curtains wide on purpose. I wanted every corner visible, every picture frame honest. The house had that Sunday quiet, even though it was a Tuesday. No television, no radio, just the clock over the mantel keeping time with a steady, stubborn tick. My house, the same white clapboard I painted with my wife every other summer. The same front porch where my daughter learned to shell peas. Tonight, it would be a courtroom disguised as a family meeting, and I would not be the defendant. Not anymore. I set the long oak table first, not with dinner plates, but with documents. I laid them out the way my old firehouse captain used to lay out tools before a call. Top left was the letter Margaret had left me, her handwriting trembling but stern. Beside it, her will, dated and notarized, the red seal catching the light. Next, a copy of the trust Rebecca had built around the house, the business accounts, and the life insurance. I slid a printed email from the bank beneath a paperweight, a little brass firefighter helmet Linda bought at a flea market confirming in plain text that withdrawals had been frozen 2 weeks ago. On the far end, almost shy, sat the deed to the apartment building on Cedar Street where Sarah and Mark paid rent. The deed was in my name. It had been for years. I hadn't known until Chapter 2 of my life folded open like a hidden page. Rebecca arrived first. She never wore loud colors. Navy blazer, gray slacks, hair pinned back the way teachers do when they mean business. She set her briefcase on the chair and looked at me over her reading glasses. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, and my voice didn't shake. It used to shake, in Chapter 1 and most of Chapter 2, when hurt still ran the show. But today the hurt had someplace to go. It had become a plan. Dr. Grant rang the bell a minute later. He's a steady man with a soft smile, the kind of physician who still looks you in the eye and asks about your garden. He carried a slim folder, and when he stepped inside, he took a deep breath like the house had a story he wanted to hear. "Good to see you, Harry," he said. "How's that blood pressure?" I laughed at the normalcy of it. "Better than it's been in months." "Good," he said. "Let's keep it that way." "Mrs. Collins shuffled over from next door just before 5. She wore the pink cardigan she saved for Easter and brought a foil-covered plate of lemon bars even though we weren't eating. "I know this isn't a party," she whispered, "but sugar helps nerves." She patted my hand at the threshold and her eyes misted. "I'm here. Don't you forget it." The small kindness landed in me with the weight of a promise. Strangers had shown me more care than my own blood lately. That thought didn't stab the way it used to. It steeled me. At 5:30, their car pulled up, exact as a clock striking. Sarah walked in first, chin lifted, perfume trailing behind her like a veil. Mark followed with a leather portfolio tucked under his arm, his tie too bright for the hour. He scanned the table and smiled without showing teeth. "Looks official," he said. His voice always sounded like it belonged to someone in a commercial. "We're glad you agreed to talk." "Oh, I invited you to listen," I said. Then I stepped aside so they could see Rebecca, and behind her, Dr. Grant and Mrs. Collins were sitting quietly on the far couch like a jury that knew me better than anyone else in the room. The mood cinched tight. If air could frown, it would have. Sarah kept her coat on. She looked at the framed photo of her mother on the mantel, and then looked away too fast. "Dad," she said, "we don't need an audience." "They're not an audience," I told her. "They're witnesses." Mark's smile thinned. He clicked open his portfolio and spread sheets across the table as if he were setting out appetizers. He had a spreadsheet with columns in green and red. He had a typed proposal for a family transition. He had a glossy brochure for a retirement community with pictures of cheerful people playing bingo. "We've put together a plan," he said, tapping the green numbers. "This protects you, Dad. The house is worth $900,000 on a conservative appraisal. We've got a buyer interested. We move the proceeds into a managed account, pay your fees at Riverview, and you never have to worry about maintenance again." "You mean I never have to worry about living in my own home again?" I said. "It's about safety," Sarah cut in too quickly. "About dignity. You've had slips." I looked at my hands. They were steady as table legs. My breath didn't catch. "We'll get to that," I said. "First, thank you for coming. I asked you here so we could put all our cards on the table. You've just shown me yours." I placed my palm on the letter from the bank. "Now it's my turn." Rebecca cleared her throat with a sort of professional kindness. "Before Mr. Avery goes further," she said, "2 brief items for the record. I'm attorney Rebecca Hayes, retained by Mr. Avery, and this is Dr. Paul Grant, his primary physician for 15 years. Dr. Grant nodded. "I examined Harry last week. He is cognitively intact, independent in all activities of daily living, and quite capable of managing his affairs." Mark's jaw flexed. "We don't need a pep talk from a family friend." Dr. Grant opened his folder and slid a signed evaluation across the table. "Not a pep talk," he said. "An assessment, dated this month. You'll see the scores if you care to look." Sarah didn't pick up the paper. She folded her arms, hugged herself, and stared at the corner of the rug like it was safer than my eyes. "Dad, this is getting combative. We're here for your own good." "We'll see," I said softly. But first, I want to ask a small question. I pointed at the spreadsheet Mark had brought, the one with columns labeled Sale, Proceeds, Care. Whose plan was this? Yours? Or the lawyer who sent me those transfer papers after your Sunday roast last month? Mark didn't blink. It's a collaborative plan, he said. It's a takeover disguised as a plan, I said. I kept my voice calm, not a shout, not a tremble, a flat, steady road. And it's missing one large, inconvenient thing. I tapped my paperweight. The law. He chuckled. The law is why we're here, Harry. The law is why you're about to sit down, I said. I slid the trust across the table. This is a living trust Margaret and I set up. I updated it with Rebecca 2 weeks ago. It places this house into the trust for my benefit. No transfer can occur without my consent. The bank letter here confirms that the $300,000 savings account is frozen pending any attempted withdrawal that lacks my signature. And as for the rent you pay on Cedar Street, I put the deed down like a final domino. You may want to take a closer look at where your checks go. That building is mine. Sarah's head snapped up so fast that a piece of hair flew loose from her clip. The shock in her eyes made her look like the little girl who once burst into tears when I told her Santa couldn't come early. "Dad," she whispered. "The building?" "The building," I said. "The landlord you mail every month is a trust Margaret formed quietly years ago. It transfers to me upon her death. I didn't know until I found her letter. She kept it quiet for a reason." I turned to the mantel and glanced at Margaret's photo just long enough for the hurt to steady itself into memory. She knew a day might come when someone in this family would forget what the word family means. Mark reached for the deed. Rebecca slid it to the center, just beyond his fingers, and folded her hands. "You'll notice the county stamp, Mr. Dawson," she said. "It's official." He smiled again. It was the smile that used to charm waitresses into refilling his coffee without asking. I had liked that smile once. Now it looked like a mask slipping. "This is theater," he said. "A stunt. An old man's tantrum backed by a hired pen. It doesn't change the reality." "What reality is that?" I asked. "That you're declining," he said smoothly. "You forget dates, you repeat yourself, you let the stove run. You need structured care. We have a responsibility to make that happen." There it was. The same drum he had been beating for months. The one that turned care into a weapon. I opened my mouth, but Sarah got there first. "Dad," she said, the word crumbling. "Last week you called me on Tuesday and asked if it was Sunday. Mark thinks we need to do the right thing even if you're angry." My chest tightened. I remembered Tuesday. I had been sorting Margaret's papers for hours that day. The light had blurred. Time does that when you sit with a ghost. "Do you remember what I was doing?" I asked her. "Do you remember why?" "Because you obsess," Mark said gently. "Because you dwell." Because I was reading your mother's letter," I told Sarah, keeping my eyes on her face. "Because I was holding the reason I still have a home." I turned back to Mark. "You want to talk about memory? Let's talk." He didn't flinch. He pulled a thin folder from his portfolio with a flourish. "I anticipated your denial," he said. "Here's a neuropsych report, 8 months old. It notes mild cognitive impairment. It recommends oversight of financial decisions. We will submit it to the court if we must." That was the light explosion we had prepared for. I felt the first sting of it, I won't lie. It is a strange thing to hear strangers summarize your brain like an old engine. But then Grant leaned forward and slid another document beside Mark's. "Here is last week's evaluation," he said, voice even. "Scores improved. The earlier report was taken during a period of grief and sleep deprivation, which is documented. Mr. Avery is competent. Fully." Mark's confidence thinned at the edges. "Doctors disagree all the time," he said too quickly. Rebecca's tone held no heat at all. "And judges prefer the most recent, most thorough exam by the treating physician of record. Sit down, Mr. Dawson." For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then he sank into the chair, exhaling through his nose in a way men do when the story they wrote in their head hits a wall. "Before we go further," I said, "I want to hear from Mrs. Collins." Mrs. Collins, God bless her, had been sitting with her hands in her lap like she was watching a school play. She stood slowly and cleared her throat. "I live next door," she said, in that crisp way retired librarians have. "I've lived here 32 years. I see Harry most days. He checks the mail, waters the roses, walks to church, and recently started sanding old chairs in the back shed again. Last winter, when my heat went on the blink, he brought over space heaters and sat with me till the repairman came. He is steady. He is kind. He is not the man these papers describe. That's all. She sat down, hands shaking just a little. My eyes stung. I blinked it back. "Thank you," I said. "That means more than you know." Sarah swiped at her eyes, irritated by her own tears. "Dad, we're not saying you're incompetent," she said, and then her voice hardened as if Mark had pinched her under the table. "We're saying you need help making big decisions. You're letting Mom's things keep you stuck. This house is worth $900,000. That's not sentiment, that's a number we could put to work." "For whom?" I asked. "For the family," she said. "For the baby we're trying to have," Mark added helpfully. "For the future." The future," I repeated, tasting the word the way people taste something they're not sure they can swallow. "Mark, I've seen the future you plan. I've heard it." I reached under the table and clicked on a small recorder, the kind contractors use to dictate notes. The little red light glowed. "2 weeks ago, you left a voicemail on your financial buddy's phone while you were parked in my driveway. You didn't know it was recorded to the cloud. Technology's funny that way. I saved it." I pressed play. His voice filled the room, silky and eager. "Trust me, Brad, once we get him to Riverview and the house sells, we're liquid. 900 grand on the property, plus whatever's in his savings. He won't fight long. He's tired. The minute we show the capacity report, it's over." Silence is loud when it lands. Rebecca didn't move. Dr. Grant folded his arms. Mrs. Collins made a small sound like a bird crying. Sarah stared at Mark the way people stare at an accident they can't stop watching. "You said that?" she whispered. Mark shifted. "It's taken out of context." "It's exactly in context," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. The words sat between us like a stone. "And while we're discussing context, let me put something else on the table." I slid the letter from Margaret to the center. "Your mother anticipated this," I told Sarah. "She wrote a will 6 months before she died. It leaves everything to me for my lifetime. You inherit only if you treat me with respect and provide care. If you attempt to control or exploit me, you are disinherited. That clause has teeth. It stands." Sarah's face went white. "Mom wouldn't—" "She did," I said softly, "because she loved you enough to want you to love me. Not my house. Me." Mark grabbed for the letter. Rebecca placed her hand over it like a referee. "You touch these documents again, and we end this meeting and call the police," she said, polite as a bell with steel behind it. He sat back, eyes burning. "This is war, then," he said. "You want to humiliate us. You're parading neighbors, doctors, lawyers, like a circus." "I want to stop the harm," I said. "And I want you to hear clearly what harm looks like." I lifted another sheet, a printout from a public records search Rebecca's paralegal had run. "You have outstanding debt on 2 credit cards, totaling $53,000, and a failed investment in a cryptocurrency scheme last year. You have a pending complaint with your former employer for mishandling client funds. None of that would be my business, except that your plan to put the proceeds to work had less to do with me and more to do with plugging holes in a sinking boat." His face flared. "You had someone dig through my life?" "You brought a shovel to my door first," I said. "I simply watched where you planned to dig." Sarah turned to him, sudden heat driving out the denial. "You told me it was just a rough patch," she said, her voice small and furious at once. "You told me the investments were safe." "It's manageable," he said, hands raised, palms showing. "Don't let him manipulate you. He's spinning this." "Oh, I let the fight bloom between them, not to be cruel, but because the truth does its own work when given air." They volleyed for a minute, her tears, his rational tone, that tone men use when they want you to believe you are overreacting. Then I put the gavel down. "Enough," I said. "I didn't invite you to my home to referee your marriage. I brought you here to end an argument about my life." I lifted the trust again. "As of last week, the house is locked. The savings are locked. My lawyer has notified the county that any deed transfer, without my explicit consent, will be flagged and halted. And because I am tired of hearing veiled threats about Riverview, I have one last clarification." Mark's expression shifted. He smelled a trap but didn't know where it was. He leaned back like a boxer, cocking his shoulder for a punch he couldn't see. "Go ahead," he said. I turned the Cedar Street deed around. "Your lease renews in 6 weeks. I have no intent to evict my daughter, but I will not tolerate harassment or manipulation. If I hear one more word about forcing me into care, if I receive one more transfer form slid across my dinner table, your lease will not be renewed. You will have 30 days to move." Sarah gasped. "Dad, you wouldn't—" Mark laughed, a harsh sound. "He would. Look at him. He's enjoying this." I stepped to the side so I could see Margaret's photo over their shoulders. "Enjoy isn't the word," I said. "Relief is closer. Dignity is closer." I looked back at them. This is not revenge. This is a boundary. Silence stretched. The clock ticked. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked like the world outside didn't care that mine had narrowed to the top of this table. Mark leaned forward again with one last swing. He slid the old neuropsych report closer and tapped the line with a perfectly manicured nail. "This might seem like a boundary to you," he said, voice low, "but to a judge it could look like confusion, impulsivity. We can still petition the court for guardianship. They usually err on the side of safety." "Petition all you like," Rebecca said, and the way she said it stopped him like a stop sign. "You'll be met with this week's evaluation, with recordings of your coercive statements, with a witness from next door, and with bank alerts showing attempts to move funds that did not belong to you. The court does not like elder exploitation, and prosecutors like it even less." "Oh?" He sat back as if someone had cut his strings. For the first time tonight he looked his age. It wasn't much, but it was honest. I took a breath and let it fill the room. "There's one last thing," I said, and now my voice did change. Not higher, not louder, just deeper, like something being set into place. Margaret left a second letter, shorter. She asked me not to hoard this house like a dragon with a pile of gold. She asked me to give, to honor a life built on work by working for the lives of others. I took that to heart. Sarah blinked, thrown by the turn. "What does that mean?" "It means I've amended the trust so that upon my death, this house and the bulk of my estate will pass to a beneficiary who has treated me with consistent kindness, who has shown up when there was nothing to gain." I let the words hang for one full breath. "The primary beneficiary is the Avery Good Neighbor Fund, a charitable trust that will help older folks fight the same kind of pressure I faced. The secondary beneficiary, if she chooses to oversee the fund, is Mrs. Collins." Mrs. Collins's mouth fell open. "Oh, heavens," she whispered. Mark exploded. "You're giving our family's house to a stranger in a charity?" I met his fury with bones still calm. "I'm giving my house to the kind of love that didn't ask me to sign papers while the funeral flowers were still fresh." Sarah pressed her hands to her face. "Mom would never—" I pointed to Margaret's letter, to the line where she had written in that careful hand, "Use this not to wound, but to protect. Stand tall, my love." "Your mother knew exactly what she asked," I said, "and I am doing it." Their reactions came in waves, then, like a storm that refuses to settle on one kind of weather. Anger, bargaining, tears, blame. Mark tried logic again. He tried to spin the recording as a misunderstood joke. He tried to turn the lease into a threat I would regret. Sarah wept, then dried her face, then accused me of choosing a neighbor over blood. She demanded to see the clauses in the will. She demanded to call her own attorney. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean back. I let the storm break and pass. "Why?" She said finally the word ragged. "Why would you shut me out? Why would you do this to your daughter?" "I'm not shutting you out," I said. "I'm telling you the way back in." I tapped Margaret's claws again. Respect and care. Not speeches, not spreadsheets. Show up. Sit with me when the night feels long. Water the roses without taking a picture. Bring me the lemon bars, not because you want something, but because you know I like them. It isn't hard. It is just love. Her tears stilled. She stared at me like I had offered her an answer on a test she hadn't studied for, and she wasn't sure she wanted to pass. Mark stood abruptly. His chair scraped across the hardwood, the sound a rude word. "This meeting is over," he said. "You'll hear from us." "You already did," I said, and I pressed stop on the recorder. They left with a slam that rattled the window panes. Rebecca exhaled first. She closed her eyes. opened them again, and the steel in them softened. "You did well," she said. "You held the line." Dr. Grant rose and squeezed my shoulder. "You were clear," he said. "Clarity is mercy, even when it hurts." Mrs. Collins set the lemon bars on the table like they were communion. "I can take these home if you like," she said softly, "or we could cut them now and call it a small victory." I smiled, the kind of tired smile men wear after work that required something from the marrow. "Cut them," I said. "We've earned a square." We ate in a circle that felt like family, because it was, even if none of us had the same last name. When they left, the house exhaled. The light on the mantel turned amber, then pale, then blue. I walked from room to room, turned deadbolts, checked windows, the old habits of a man who used to inspect every inch of a building before calling it safe. When I reached the living room again, the documents still sat like calm boats. I gathered them carefully, slid them into the safe, and pressed the steel down until I heard the click that sounded like a promise. In the quiet, the clock picked up its ticking again. For a minute, I let my hand rest on the safe door, the cool metal grounding me. "We did it, Margaret," I said, and the words filled the room as if she had been waiting in the doorway with that steady, half-worried smile she used to wear when I came in late from a fire. "We stopped the blaze before it burned the house." My phone buzzed. For a second, I thought about not picking up, but I did. The caller ID showed Sarah. I let it go to voicemail and listened as it translated on the screen. "Dad, I don't know what to say. He's saying a lot of things. I need time. Please don't change the locks." I put the phone face down. I didn't change the locks. I had already changed something bigger. The next morning, Rebecca filed what needed filing. Certified letters went out to the bank, to the county recorder's office, and to the Cedar Street property management firm. The trust language slid into the right digital folders with the right dates. Dr. Grant scanned his evaluation and sent it to my email with a note. "Proud of you." Mrs. Collins appeared at noon with a thermos of chicken soup, and the look women wear when they have decided someone is theirs. The storm, as storms do, tried to circle back that afternoon. Mark texted, then called again. He left a message with a new tone, the tone of a man who has not yet accepted defeat and believes volume can fix that. "You will regret this," he said. "You will be alone when you need us. People will see what you did to your own daughter." There was a threat there, soft as a blade under a coat. I did not answer. Silence can be a shield if you let it. 2 days later, the other half of the plan met the light. Rebecca's paralegal found a small thing that was not small at all buried in a county database. A quitclaim deed Mark had drafted and backdated, ready for me to sign the Sunday after the funeral. The signature line was blank, but the intent was loud. Rebecca emailed me the screenshot. "If they press the guardianship angle," she wrote, "we'll share this. It speaks for itself." It did. It spoke like a siren. A week after that, the last thread snapped in open daylight. We gathered again at the house, not for a meeting, but because Sarah texted and asked to come alone. "No surprises," I typed back. She arrived in a sweatshirt and no makeup, the armor off. She stood in the entryway, eyes red like she hadn't slept. "I'm mad at you," she said. "I'm mad at him. I'm mad at myself. I needed to say that out loud." "Okay," I said. Sometimes the kindest word is a simple one. "Okay." "I did a cruel thing," she went on. "I let him talk me into bringing that old report. We planned the dinner so you'd feel cornered. We thought we were being smart. We were being mean." She swallowed hard. I heard my own voice on that recording. It sounded like a stranger. "You can choose a different voice," I said. She nodded, tears brimming again. "I don't want the house," she said, and the words came out like a confession. "I want my dad. I don't know how to fix what we broke." "Start with respect," I said, "then add time. That's how anything good gets built." We did not hug. Not yet, but she sat, and I made coffee, and we drank it like two people who might learn how to talk again. When she left, the house felt lighter. Not because a battle had ended, but because one hadn't begun. There is an ending to every chapter, and this one deserved a line said out loud, the kind that anchors a man where he stands. I picked up Margaret's letter and read the last sentence again. "Use this not to wound, but to protect. Stand tall." I folded it carefully and slid it back into its envelope. Then I spoke into the empty room. Not a shout, not a whisper, something in between. They thought I was weak, I said. But now they see the consequences. The day dimmed. I turned on the porch light. From the sidewalk, the house glowed like a lighthouse. A simple square of stubborn hope. Those were the best kind. Before I went to bed, I sat in Margaret's chair one last time and let the whole night replay in my head like a film. The steady voices, the paper slid like cards in a game where I finally knew the rules. The way Mark's confidence curdled when he realized I had heard him in his own words. The way Sarah's anger deflated into something more honest. The way Mrs. Collins' courage filled a space I didn't know courage could fill. Justice hadn't come as a gavel this time. It came as clarity. It came as a boundary set with a hand that no longer shook. That's when the ache rose up, strange and fierce. The ache of being dismissed by your own child. The ache of being weighed like a liability. I let myself feel it, the whole sore heaviness, so it wouldn't rot in the corners later. It hurts, I said to the quiet room, to anyone who might be listening. Being looked at like you're useless hurts. Then I breathed out, slow. It won't own me. Oh, and because this is a story told to others as much as to myself, I will say to you what I said to that shadow in the room. Feeling invisible inside your own family is hard, isn't it? If you believe every parent deserves recognition and basic respect, drop one word in the comments so the world hears it loud. Justice. Now watch what we do next to change it. The night settled. The document slept in steel. The roses outside rested their thorns. The house, for the first time in a long time, felt like it belonged to the truth again. And somewhere beyond the quiet, I could almost hear Margaret's laugh, a small, proud sound, as if she were standing in the doorway, saying what she used to say when a fire was out and we were headed home. That's enough for tonight, Harry. Come sit, you've earned it. I turned off the lamp. Upstairs, the hall light cast a stripe across the family photos, the baby cheeks, the first day of school grins, the wedding cake on a July afternoon. Those pictures were not lies because people in them later lost their way. They were proof that love had been real once and could be real again in new, truer forms. I ran my fingers along the frames as I passed. A quiet blessing. Then I went to bed with the kind of tired that closes a chapter clean, not because nothing can change, but because something finally has. If you're still watching and find this story interesting, please comment below to let me know you're here with me. The weeks after that stormy family meeting felt like the quiet after a long fire has been put out. The walls of my house no longer trembled with the sound of slammed doors or raised voices. Papers were in order, the trust secure, the bank accounts frozen against greedy hands. For the first time in months, maybe years, I could sleep through the night without jolting awake, wondering what new trick my own blood might try to pull. I had done the hard part. Now came the work of building a life that was mine again. News about Mark spread quickly. He had always been proud of his job, proud of his polished reputation, proud of the way he shook hands at church, as if every eye were watching. But reputations are fragile when the truth comes to light. His employer discovered the complaint about mishandled client funds wasn't just smoke, it was fire. Within 2 weeks, he was dismissed. I heard from Rebecca that other firms wouldn't touch him, not after the story of the guardianship attempt, and the recording of his own voice, promising to liquidate my savings, made its way into the community. People stopped greeting him at the grocery store. Neighbors crossed the street rather than meet his eyes. It was the kind of isolation that doesn't come from punishment alone, but from shame. Sarah tried to patch things in her own way. One morning, the mail brought a pale blue envelope with her handwriting on the front. My chest tightened before I even opened it. Inside was a letter, 2 pages long. She wrote about regret, about the way she had let her husband's ambition warp her own sense of loyalty. She wrote that she never meant to hurt me, that she was sorry for the lies, the cornering, the threats. At the bottom she wrote, "Please forgive me, Dad. I don't want to lose you." I read it once, twice, and then folded it neatly back into the envelope. I placed it in the drawer where Margaret's letters lived. But I did not respond. My forgiveness, if it existed, was not going to be a gift wrapped in words. It would be a choice to free myself, not to release them. I whispered into the still room, "I don't need their apology. I have my life." and my life began to change. With Rebecca's help, I sold a small parcel of land I no longer used and set aside $250,000. That money became the seed for the Avery Fund, a local trust to help older folks stand up to scams, coercion, and family exploitation. It felt right. It felt like turning ashes into shelter. Margaret would have been proud. I imagined her smile, the one she wore when she watched me teach fire safety at the elementary school. A quiet, satisfied smile that said, "This is the work that matters." I kept the house. I refused to let their plot steal the place Margaret and I had built together, but the house no longer felt heavy with fear. Instead, I opened the curtains each morning, let sunlight wash across the wood floors, and walked the halls as if reclaiming each step. On Saturdays, I joined the old firehouse boys at the cinder block clubhouse near the river. We drank weak coffee, swapped stories about close calls and old rigs, and laughed until the air itself felt younger. For years, I had avoided those gatherings, ashamed of my tiredness, afraid of leaving Margaret alone. Now I went gladly, and each time I shook a hand, I felt stitched back into the world. In the afternoons, I worked in the garden. The roses Margaret had planted still clawed their way up the trellis, defiant and bright. I pulled weeds, turned soil, let sweat bead down my back like I was 30 again. Sometimes Mrs. Collins came over with her wide-brimmed hat and a trowel. We didn't need to talk much. Two people working side by side in the dirt say more with silence than with chatter. She always left with a handful of tomatoes or a vase of zinnias, and I always felt lighter after she went. Peace has a way of sneaking up in the smallest places. One cool October morning, I walked through the park with a thermos of coffee. The leaves were coming down in waves, the whole ground a quilt of red and gold. A boy 6, maybe 7, raced past me chasing a squirrel. He stopped, bent, picked up a perfect yellow maple leaf, and pressed it into my hand without a word before running off again. The leaf was fragile, already curling at the edges, but in my palm it felt like a medal. I smiled, a smile so deep it reached places that had been clenched tight for too long. "I don't need them anymore," I murmured to myself. "I have me, and I have the whole world waiting." That was the difference. I had not only survived betrayal, I had built something out of it. My days were not about guarding against loss, but about living in abundance. The abundance of quiet mornings, of neighbors who cared, of friendships rekindled, of dignity restored. The abundance of knowing that when the time comes, I will leave behind not just money, but meaning. And yet, I would be dishonest if I said, the hurt never stirs. Sometimes, when the night is still, and the clock ticks too loudly, I see Sarah's face at the table that night, the way her tears blurred with anger, the way her voice cracked when she said, "Why would you do this to your daughter?" I ache for the little girl she once was, the one who brought me dandelions in a jelly jar. But then I remember the lesson Margaret wrote in her own hand. Respect and care are not negotiable. Love without respect is not love at all. I breathe, let the ache pass, and return to my bed lighter. Their lives went on, of course. They moved into a cramped apartment on the edge of town after their lease expired. I heard from neighbors that Mark applied for jobs at 3 different firms, but none accepted him. He started driving deliveries at night. Sarah works part-time at a daycare. Her shoulders stooped when I glimpsed her at the market once. She looked older than her years. They still send cards now and then, but I don't open them. The envelopes sit in a small box. I don't need their words to live free. Silence is its own kind of answer. The lessons carved out of this ordeal are not light. They are heavy, but they shine. To parents, I say this: love your children, yes, but love yourself enough to set limits. Boundaries are not cruel. They are the lines that keep love from turning into chains. To children, I say, greed and disrespect are debts you cannot outrun. They will come due in ways you cannot imagine. And about human nature, I have learned this. Money can tempt, blood can betray, but character is the one inheritance no one can steal. If you guard it, you will never be poor. One evening, as the sun sank behind the sycamores, I sat on my porch swing and let the day wrap itself in orange and pink. A couple walked by with their dog, waved, and called out, "Beautiful night, isn't it?" I waved back and thought, yes, it is. because it's mine. That was all I had ever wanted, not riches, not control, not even apologies. Just the right to live in peace, to be seen with dignity, to belong to myself. The chapter of betrayal had closed. Ahead stretched pages not yet written, pages of gardens and laughter and quiet evenings. I would fill them slowly, carefully, with people who had proven themselves worthy, with acts of kindness that turned pain into shelter for others. Margaret's voice seemed to echo in my chest when I thought of it. "Stand tall, my love." I was standing, taller than I had been in years. Feeling betrayed by your own family is a heavy burden, isn't it? If you believe every parent and every child deserves to live with respect and dignity, share your voice with me now. Comment on the lesson that struck you most. I want to read every single one of your truths. The story has come to an end. I hope it has brought you valuable lessons and insights. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next video. Goodbye, and see you again.